There's one chart that, once you actually see it, completely changes how you think about why you feel behind financially. It's not a chart about your spending habits. It's not about your discipline or your choices. It's a chart that shows two lines moving apart from each other over the last 40 years. And once those two lines separate, almost everything else about modern financial anxiety starts making sense. More than half of Americans say they feel behind financially right now, even in one of the stronger labor markets in recent memory. That number alone should tell you something. This isn't a personal failure happening to millions of individuals separately. It's a structural pattern, and the chart explains exactly why. Here's what the chart actually shows. One line is wages. Adjusted for inflation, real wages in the US have remained largely stagnant for decades. A worker earning a certain salary today, adjusted for purchasing power, often isn't earning meaningfully more than someone in a comparable job a generation ago. The second line is the cost of the things that actually build financial security. Housing, education, healthcare. That line hasn't moved slowly. It's climbed sharply and consistently. Home prices have risen more than 20 times over since the early 1960s. The cost of a 4-year college education has more than doubled over the last 4 decades, even after adjusting for inflation. So you have one line barely moving and another line climbing steeply, decade after decade. That gap between the two lines is the entire story. It's not that people got worse at managing money. It's that the ground underneath them shifted while the number on their paycheck stayed roughly the same. That gap becomes even clearer when you look at generational comparisons. Only about half of people born around 1980 ended up earning more than their parents did at the same age. Compare that to people born in the 1940s, where roughly 90% surpassed their parents' earnings. That's not a small shift. That's an entire generation's baseline expectation quietly collapsing. And it shows up in how people actually feel. Nearly half of adults in their 30s through 60s report feeling worse off financially than their parents were at the same stage of life. That's not just a vibe. That's a direct, measurable reflection of the chart. But the chart only explains half the story. The other half is psychological, and it's just as powerful. Financial researchers describe something called the illusion gap. People don't evaluate their finances on an absolute scale. They evaluate them relative to everyone around them. And the visible signals of financial health, the car someone drives, the vacations they post, the house they just bought, are almost completely disconnected from that person's actual balance sheet. The colleague who just bought a house may have had significant help from family. The friend driving a new SUV may be leveraged to the edge of their income. You're comparing your real numbers to someone else's highlight reel, and the math was never going to work in your favor. There's also a moving goalpost problem. Financial milestones that felt attainable for previous generations, buying a home in your late 20s, being debt-free by 40, retiring at 65 with a pension, simply don't map onto the current economic reality anymore. But the expectation lingers. So when people don't hit those old benchmarks on the old timeline, they interpret it as personal failure rather than recognizing that the benchmark itself became outdated. Here's a specific data point that puts real numbers behind the feeling. Median net worth for people in their late 30s and early 40s sits well under $150,000. But the average, pulled sharply upward by high earners, sits at several times that figure, with the wealthiest households in that age group holding close to $1 million or more. That massive gap between the median and the average means most people's frame of reference is being unconsciously skewed by outliers they'll never actually resemble in real life. When financial media, social media, and casual conversation reference wealth, they're often unknowingly referencing the average or the outliers, not the median reality that most households actually live in. So what actually explains the gap between the person who genuinely feels behind and the one who moves forward with confidence? According to research on this exact question, it isn't income. And for most people, it isn't inheritance either. The two consistent variables are savings rate and housing discipline. People who build wealth faster than their peers aren't necessarily earning more. They're keeping more of what they earn and consistently putting it to work. That reframes the entire problem. If the chart shows wages stagnating against rising costs, the individual lever left to pull isn't your income line, which is largely dictated by the broader market. It's the percentage of that income you actually keep and invest. That's the one line on the chart you have direct control over. There's also a practical way to separate feeling behind from actually being behind. Financial researchers suggest tracking net worth on a rolling 12-month basis rather than reacting to any single month. A single month tells you almost nothing. A 12-month trend tells you your actual direction, and direction matters significantly more than your current position relative to anyone else. The next time the feeling of being behind shows up, the more useful question isn't "Am I behind?" It's "Behind what specifically, and whose benchmark is that actually based on?" Often, the honest answer is that the benchmark belonged to a completely different economic era, one where wages and costs used to move together instead of apart. The chart doesn't excuse everything. Savings habits and spending discipline still matter enormously. But it does explain why the feeling of falling behind is so widespread, even among people who are, by most objective measures, doing reasonably well. The ground shifted. The paycheck didn't move with it. And most people were never told that the rules had quietly changed underneath them. So here's the question worth sitting with. When you feel behind financially, are you actually behind? Or are you measuring yourself against a version of the economy that no longer exists?